Welcome to the CTO Function Podcast. I'm PJ Kerner, and my goal here is to help people understand and make sense of this amorphous CTO role. I like to have our guests answer questions about what it takes to succeed at the role, and we explore how the job of the CTO changes based on the scale and the needs of the organization. I've done variations of the CTO job for 15 plus years. I still find that it's a challenging and multifaceted job. And I personally learn a lot by talking to other CTOs and hope you do too. So I'd like to welcome Sitar Harel, who is the CTO and co-founder working at a very small stealth startup. My goal on the show is to have CTOs from all stages and types of companies. So what's interesting about Sitar's journey is that he's only at the very beginning of it, both from his career and his company. But he's exploring the consumer fintech space, and listening in, you can learn about some of the challenges that are there. I also realized what might be great about the show is to have people come back after a year or two and share what has changed from the first time they came on. But that's for the future. Also, if you're a CTO and you're interested in coming on and sharing your insights, you can find me on LinkedIn and send me a message. So let's get into the show. Welcome, Sitar. Welcome to the CTO Function Podcast. What I'd like to start off with is for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience as a CTO and the organization that you're working at and what you're doing.
Thanks so much for having me on, PJ. So my name is Sitar. I am the CTO of a very small kind of seed stage startup. We are just three co-founders currently. We've raised a little bit of money, and we're really, we're racing as fast as we can towards launching something. So we are pre-MVP launch. But I think of myself as a CTO, but I think a perhaps more accurate title for me, given that I don't have an organization under me, is founder. But given that, my role is very much, I'm the technical co-founder. I really do think that, there's a lot about me and about my experience that, perhaps lends an interesting perspective to CTOs. So we are, our startup is, it's a fintech startup. It's a consumer startup as well. So it's kind of an interesting space to be working in. I've never worked on a fintech in fintech before. I've worked on consumer for a few years, but it's been a really interesting experience, and I've definitely been learning a lot.
So it's interesting. I've always found there's a big difference between B2B enterprise businesses and B2C businesses. I'm curious about what for a CTO that's doing a consumer business, is there anything kind of unique about that? And maybe if you haven't, you clearly haven't done all of the different types, but I was kind of curious about maybe some of the challenges on the consumer side.
Yeah, I will say, I might answer some of these questions with my CTO hat turned to the side and my founder hat also showing a little bit. But, consumer tech is so different than enterprise tech. I worked at Google for a few years as a product manager before starting the startup. And I got to work on both enterprise and consumer products there, which was great. I'll say for a startup specifically, consumer has a very, it's kind of a different feeling. It's a different feeling to be working in a consumer space. It's kind of hard to describe exactly what I mean by that, but I feel that we have less control over our outcomes in a consumer world. And perhaps it's just that I don't have quite as much experience with enterprise, but with consumer, you could build the best app that solves a real problem that everyone in your user testing, all the signs pointed to this being something that would work. And when you launch it, it could just not work. The market could be not right. And everything that we're doing because of that, we need to take that into account, right? And as we're making decisions, we think really hard about, is this decision something that's going to be helping us get this in front of users? If we get this in front of users sooner, then we will be able to truly test, like, is this something that is going to work? And for now, we don't know the answer to that question. So I think that is really the biggest difference that I day to day notice and feel between consumer enterprise at our stage.
Does that change how you pick technologies? Or do like I mean, clearly there's a all startups have the kind of race to get MVP and have to move fast.
Yeah.
So like that's a comment, but does it change anything else? And maybe not, but
Yeah, we're actually in an interesting kind of structural situation, even among consumer startups, because we're a fintech startup. We have to work with a bank, and there's a bunch of these compliance needs that have to happen in the run up to us actually launching, even an MVP. Um, and so I actually think that there's this whole angle of things of we should try to be launching something as fast as possible. Um, I think for me, actually, in the specific situation that we're in, I actually maybe think of things a little bit differently. Um, we have the luxury of, I say luxury, it's not really a luxury, but we have this kind of block before we're able to launch of all these compliance checks that have to happen before we're actually able to launch something. And that means that uh, there is time. There is something that's blocking MVP launch that isn't development, which means that I am able to be a little bit more thoughtful about the long-term implications about the decisions that I make. So I think my hunch is that if we were a consumer startup, maybe working in AI right now, and we needed to launch immediately, I probably wouldn't think as hard about, like uh, the longevity of our security system, or ensuring that all the DevOps is going to be scalable to having dozens of engineers working on this. But I really want us to launch, and then for us to be able to update it. Like, I want us to launch and be able to continue working on it. And for that to happen, I think we need to be mindful of the longer term implications of our decisions.
yeah, and I think I've always found that we've been audited by companies who have forced us to um, force the technology to become more mature, right? And I think on one hand you could sort of see it as slowing you down. On the other hand, if you see it as kind of building a stronger foundation, those are two sides of the same coin of that. And that, it sounds like for that those compliance regimes for you will trigger that. I think that's actually a really good thing for a company to have to go through, because if you
Yeah.
can just go fast and skip all that stuff, then cracks sort of I think cracks sort of appear later.
No, I actually I couldn't agree more. And in fact, an exercise that I had to do a month ago was for these compliance checks, we needed to have well documented out policies for information security and all sorts of things. And these are things that my friends who are founding companies, they're not going to think about them. Certainly not in the first year. Certainly not before launching an MVP. But taking the time to actually think about our policies and make sure that we have these systems in place. Should I get hit by a bus, for example, or should the unimaginable happen? Adds an incredible amount of robustness, and honestly, it makes me sleep better at night to know that we have this foundation of policies, things that are going to work even when an individual isn't around. So I'm actually really grateful that I was forced to do that. I would not have chosen to do that if I didn't have to. And I think that the impact was very positive beyond just meeting the compliance check.
So let's get back to the CTO function. So tell me a little bit about, and so this is your early in your CTO journey here. But tell us what for you what the CTO job is, and or what you think it's going to evolve into as well.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I'll answer very honestly. I mean, I wear a lot of hats at the company, and every day is a little bit different. I think the largest hat I've worn so far has been like system architect. I think also just the nature of having this big runway before we're able to actually cut our MVP means that I've been thinking really hard about like what are all the components that need to go in place to architect the system. But also I wear the developer hat. I'm definitely, I have the most time to be our like main developer. The CEO has lots of work that he's doing, although he's developing as well. But developer, architect. Uh, I think another like big job that I have is kind of trying to predict what technical issues are going to be in the future and what directions we're going to need to head technically in the future. What sort of investments we should be making now so that we can, recoup them later. And I think another big one is probably just like project management. Honestly, just making sure that this is something that gets built and that all the different things that need to come together happen. Um, yeah, those are the big ones. I think looking forward, I think as we hire more people, hopefully, as we hire more people, I think the role is going to change significantly. I'm actually really excited for that. I think I think the role is going to become a lot more organization management, and instead of kind of designing and building this system and our MVP of our product, it's going to turn more into kind of designing the organization that's going to be able to continue launching products and um, dealing with issues as they happen, etc.
Well,
Um, yeah.
it's interesting because when I was talking with Rob Fry, who was on a few episodes ago, he sort of talked about the one thing, it's like, do you need a CTO? Do you need a chief architect? Do you need a VP of engineering? Those things, like for him, those things all were, close together, and companies sometimes who are looking for CTOs don't, or might need a flavor of all three of those things at some levels, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like from like you have all like, and it's at the early stages. This makes perfect sense. You're kind of doing a bunch of those and more. But
Yeah.
that's what early stage is.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what do you think some of the skills are that CTOs need to be good at the role?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely lots of skills. Actually, I think a step to the side a little bit. I actually think every CTO is different, obviously, and every person is different, and there's lots of different ways you could approach this job. Um, I think skills that I've found have been useful for me have been. I think a big one is just communicating, finding creative ways to communicate. Um, we I So my startup is distributed. So my co-founder lives in Zurich. So we've got this whole time zone thing in addition to being remote, and finding ways to communicate well, to not have to repeat decisions, um, to just be a streamlined team. I think that's like I truly think that's one of the most valuable things I provide on top of being an engineer. And communication is a big one. I think another big one is like a sense of ownership. Maybe it's not a skill so much as like a commitment, but feeling real ownership over the product, and feeling like if something goes wrong, it's your fault, not your fault, but it's on you to fix it or to find some solution for it. I think that leads to taking a lot more initiative in problem solving and seeking out problems. I Maybe I'm pretty anxious sometimes when I approach problems. I'm very, I wouldn't say a pessimist. I'm a realist when it comes to especially execution. And the things we expect. 80% of the work happens in the last 20% of the time, or you the last 20% of the work takes 80% of the time. And I really think that trying to foresee problems before they happen um, helps save you some of that precious time at the end. So I spend so much time just really trying to imagine what the future is going to look like and imagine which problems we're going to run into as we deploy, as we start productionizing things. And I've been trying to, if not solve those problems, try to understand as much as I can about the space so that when the time comes, I'll be equipped to solve them.
That's good. I want to go back to the is there a specific kind of communication technique or something you learned to sort of do? Because I think that's definitely a good one, but like what worked at the really kind of small level? Because that's not going to work at thousands of people, of course
Yeah.
not. But for those out there who are kind of early stage or thinking of those, what are some tips for them? Or
Yeah, I think For communication, I mean, communication is a really broad thing, obviously. I think for us, we really struggle with uh, crossing the hurdle to communication. When there's kind of a big obstacle to communicating something, it usually just goes unsaid. And I think we feel this the most in the remote aspect of the work. When you're in
Hmm.
person, just the hallway conversations, just mentioning something offhand, there's so little barrier to mentioning it that you'll mention the small things, right? And I want to find a way as we are developing this product for us to be able to kind of have these hallway conversations without being in the same country. And that's really hard to do. So we've been trying a bunch of different things to reduce the friction to communicating something. One example, this isn't so much in the hallway conversations, but just like reducing friction is we have a single meetings doc. We don't do docs for different meetings. We just have one giant long meetings doc, and it's almost like a whiteboard, really, where you can just jot down whatever you want, and everyone has the agency to go write things there. And just having a single place that that if you think, oh, I have a thought, I might want to write it down. There's a single repository that is the first thing that's going to jump to your head. It really reduces the friction to actually writing something. Like when you have to start a new doc and add like a template and fill in the header, all those things are those little hurdles that are going to make you that are going to reduce increase the minimum granularity of an idea that you write down. And I want us to be capturing everything, right? Like if you have an idea, we should be communicating about it. So that's a tip and trick. Certainly,
There,
probably not going to work at a large company, but
there was a 100% remote company I worked at like 15 years ago. So we didn't have Slack. We had IRC, and what was interesting about that is because there were no hallway conversations. There was like the servers were in the CEO's garage somewhere, um, and um, but everything was on like and it was global. Like we had people all over the world who sort of worked, and but you woke
wow.
up in the morning and everything was there, and there was a certain amount, like there was good communication because everybody had to write the stuff down, or else you it wasn't going anywhere at all. It was
Yeah.
interesting. It was interesting. I do find interesting. I As companies are sort of starting, what new good communication patterns work for companies that are distributed and sort of
Yeah.
remote, which you see more of these days.
Yeah,
Um,
I will say I do think with communication, everyone's different also, and I think especially in the small stage, we have the luxury of adapting our communication style to our personal communication styles. And I am actually really grateful that we spent a lot of time talking about this, and we spent time finding a solution that works really well for us specifically, instead of trying to apply some general solution that might work for 200-person company to us.
I think that right there is just a really good insight. Spend time talking about how people feel about communications and make some conscious decisions as opposed to just kind of letting things, sort of happen.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Hmm.
One more on the accountability thing. I think what's interesting is as organizations grow, you have to, I mean, you have a great amount of accountability being a founder, right? As all founders do. But then you need to transfer that accountability to the next set of employees. And I do think the early set of employees, it's sort of like they become the founding team and
Uh,
so on. And well, so okay, maybe it's a question I should be asking others who are later about how accountability, which is actually easier to sort of infuse in the organization at an early stage, how it sort of works out. So, or maybe that's a question
yeah.
for another time.
Honestly, I feel like if you don't mind me like trying
Yeah,
to
no,
talk
okay, yeah,
about this,
yeah.
even with the three of us, I think there are often problems where um, none of the three of us will take ownership over it, and there's kind of like a diffusion of responsibility, and no one's owning it, right? And those situations I think are extremely dangerous when there is something that it's unclear who's owning it. I think that is the way that things fall through the cracks, and that's the way that you make a mistake that would have been avoidable if someone was actually paying attention to this thing. I don't feel like I have any good like tricks for how to avoid that, but I think that like this diffusion of responsibility issue at least is something that even small teams face.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, everybody just, if there's a thing, if nobody picks it up, it just, as you say, falls through the cracks. That's the problem.
yeah,
Being aware of it is important. So
yeah. I will say honestly, even I'm all about communication, and I think it's hard, but I think it's possible actually for us to have honest conversations about the way we interact with these sorts of things. And I think like being honest with my co-founders about, I get really anxious about things falling through the cracks, so I might take ownership of things that you feel like shouldn't be mine, but it's because I try to scoop up everything just so that nothing falls. And then hearing their response and like just understanding how the other person works, I actually think is really the critical thing to solving this sort of problem. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think we're all on the same team, and we're able to find a solution to this problem, right?
no, and that's another example of talking about it. Like it's kind of a meta comment about talking about how you do it to help solve those problems.
Yeah.
Okay. I have another question I sort of ask folks, and and there's no good answer to this. It's a breadth versus depth question, right?
Mm.
Because in the CTO role, like how do you sort of balance those two things? How much breadth, how much depth, and again, at your stage, right? Because the
Yeah.
answer kind of goes and evolves as as you get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think about that question? How do you think about it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. I can definitely imagine it being like perhaps a little more relevant at a larger size, but I do think there is a relevance here. And maybe to start answering it, I'll say there is a certain amount of depth that I have to do. Like I have to implement all of the code. So at the end of the day, like I am the engineer who's writing all the code. However, I'm also a founder, and I was a product manager for 3 years, and um, have a product instinct, and I find like I care about this product, and so naturally, like I'm designing with our designer, and I'm thinking up different business models and things, and I think that it's actually really good for me as a founder and as a CTO to be participating in these more broad conversations. And I do think that it's a balance, though. I think that getting too broad detracts from my ability to really focus on the depth and make sure that the technical stack and the system is uh, well honed. Um, but I do think that breadth is key, and I wouldn't be able to build this product well if I wasn't living and breathing the product and trying to participate in different decisions, experience kind of the sales side of things and fundraising, and that helps a lot. I do want to say I think there is a limit to breadth, however, and I think spending a lot of time in the domains that aren't strictly the one that I need to be drilling down into. First of all, it obviously distracts from the drilling, but it also, I think, um, it, it's sometimes this is maybe a broader startup thing, but it's often hard to let go when you have an opinion that differs with your co-founder. And I think for me, one of the big challenges has been letting go and like trusting my co-founder to make the decisions and being okay with my breadth being reduced a little bit, and having like things that I am explicitly not owning, that it's his job to take from top to bottom. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. And I was it's I there's not a way to do this, but it would be kind of interesting to sort of plot that the need for breadth versus depth over
Over time.
over time, because even for myself, I'll say, like, there are times when I've gotten, well, I'll say, too broad, right, and had to return to certain depth to truly understand a problem, and then you sort of want to take advantage of it, and you kind of like you get broad and deep, and you have to go back and forth.
Yeah.
Even over the years. Okay. What about another question about do you have any philosophies or frameworks that you use as the CTO to
Mm.
do that job? Um,
Yeah. I definitely have lots of philosophies. I don't know. I'm sure I use frameworks. I mean, we have like an agile development cycle that we use. Yada yada, those sorts of frameworks. I think in terms of philosophy, I'm a big believer in leadership is leadership is all is something that comes from within, and or maybe from within is the wrong way to describe it, but like a leader is not someone who someone else says is a leader. A leader is someone who truly like loves the thing that they're leading, and uh does everything, like does what's best for that thing. So I try to really, I me and my co, like we call our project the baby, and I think anthropomorphizing it a little bit like that reminds us that it's this thing that has like its own life and it's its own entity distinct from us. And um, uh, you know uh, I think the philosophy that underlies this is it's my job almost to like parent this baby. So that's one kind of uh, broad philosophy of, it's my job to tackle any problem that might happen. I think from a kind of tangential lens, I talked a little bit about, future proofing our whole system. I think a lot about making sure that the technologies that we choose are going to work not only for me as an individual coder, but also eventually when we have more engineers, that they're going to scale to a broader team. So I think, making sure that we're thoughtful in the decisions that we make is a philosophy there as well. Um, and then I think also just making decisions. It's hard to make decisions, as we all know, and it's hard to make decisions in a stressful environment. And I think that committing to moving quickly and not lingering too long on any given decisions, I think that's a hard commitment to make, but I think it's an important one.
so
Especially, yeah.
is there anything? So given all those things, because one thing a CTO has to do is make technology choices. You choose what you put in your stack, what
Yeah.
you adopt. Given those things you just said, does that make you think about those choices in a different way?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Uh, so yes, it absolutely does. There's, I think I would make a I have a certain amount of expertise with certain, types of frameworks or languages, and I think the decisions that I make about how I would build the MVP would probably be pretty different than the decisions that I wound up making, because I considered things like, are we going to be able to hire engineers to work in the language that's needed to build this backend? Are we going to be able to, is this going to work as we scale out to 100,000 users? Um, uh, is this something that, like, are we going to be able to enforce our policies with this sort of system? And I got the advice early on to um, and I think this is good advice, and I really try to stick to this, but to be okay with tech debt, and to be like okay with having to make trade-offs. And every time you make a decision, you make a trade-off. But I think I really try to lean towards, when I'm picking a system, I try to lean toward, one of my rules of thumb is like, is it going to be easy to hire someone to work on this? And because it's all greenfield, like there's no pre-existing stack, we're making the decisions from nothing. I think I have the luxury of incorporating that as a big part of the decision making process. Um, but yeah, no, there's lots of factors, and I think if it was just a race to the MVP, I think I would be approaching this quite differently.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, picking tech based on who can do it, right? There could be the right thing, and yeah, there's no developers for it. That's an interesting, important observation early on. I'll
Yeah.
tell you one more thing about the tech debt thing. When you said that, what rang with me is I did something that was so we kept a record of it, right? So for me, I find this, if I write it down somewhere, then I can take it out of my brain, right? So
Mm.
at least when it came to tech debt, we sort of said, okay, we're going to make this decision. We kind of said we're going to accept it. We put it in, a ticket, and we sort of said why we were making it. And then at some point down the road, we just circulate those things. Some of them we said, okay, well that was, either that aged out, like it's no longer a thing because we recycled whatever that was, or oh no, we need to get back to it. But I found writing it down and putting it on the side helped the acceptance of tech debt. Right? It was
Mm.
it was not it was not it was not hidden debt. It was debt that was deliberately decided on and sort of agreed on. So that was a
Yeah.
little helpful to do that. Um,
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Actually, I think we don't have a great bug tracking system right now, and we're just hitting the point with product maturity that I think it's important to start having that.
so this is kind of an obvious question, but maybe it's a question about the future. But it's an obvious question right now because you're so small. But the question is, how does the organization measure your success as a CTO, right? And you like,
Yeah,
I mean, you got to get to that MVP. You're making all the technology. So right now it seems clear what the answer is. Um, but how do you like? Maybe it'll change, or how do you like? How like?
yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to change. Like right now, I think my one success criteria is launching something that works. It doesn't have to be, perfect. It's got to be robust enough to work, but it can be buggy. Um, I think in the future, and again, this is pure speculation. Um, I think that it's going to be, if I'm going to be successful when the product is successful at the end of the day, right? And I think that's a very indirect way to measure my day-to-day impact, but I'm imagining as this role evolves into more of a organizational management role, I think that I the success of the organization's ability to build a good product, I think, is going to be the thing that ultimately I am accountable for. And I think having making the right decisions on technology and picking the right uh, everything, like that's going to be important as well. But I do think that fundamentally, at the end of the day, the success of a CTO comes from how well the technical organization is running, right? That's my guess.
No, no,
Yeah,
no, that makes sense. Well, and it's an evolving thing as
yeah.
for anybody. What about there's another question I ask, which is about internal versus external balance. So right now,
Mm.
everything is internal. You're kind of in that stealth mode, and so on.
Hmm.
It's all internal. Um, what is your like? How do you feel about that after you kind of launch and get to that point? Because I have met some CTOs who, well, they have different balance points on that when they get to the the point in which they do it. And there's either some who are very external, um, and then they have partners who do the more internal part. But I was just kind of curious what
Yeah.
your sort of take, like, put yourself, a year or two down the road. What do you see yourself as?
Yeah. I do think, I do think that this is very use case specific, like company specific, probably.
Oh, and whatever you pick now, it will be what the company needs, right? And you will, like, because we all have to do what the company needs, um, but what do you like? Maybe it's how do you see it? Like, and the company might need
Yeah.
something different, so it might be different. But how do you sort of see it?
Yeah. So, I think we're in consumer tech, right? So there's not necessarily a need, and you know, we're in the consumer space, not in the enterprise space. The product that we're selling is something that like end users are going to use. And the relationship, we do have a bit of a B2B relationship, but it's much more, uh, we're not selling businesses a product. And I think that like, I think that I'm going to wind up leaning very internal in this company. I think there will be an external component of it. I think, understanding our users is going to be so critical for me, and understanding the needs of our merchant partners is going to be really important as well. Um, but I do think at the end of the day, like I think that my job is going to be running this team really well and making sure that like we are making the right decisions about technology, and that we are making the right product decisions. And I view those things as really internal things. There's obviously like the external aspect of each of those things, of making sure that you have all the information that you need in order to make those decisions well. But at the end of the day, I think the external actions are motivated by an internal need.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe that's something we'll check in later and sort of
We'll
see
check in on
what
that
how
one.
that happens. Um, you have mentioned this a few times about and about doing product management, and I mean you're doing software development right now. I sort of asked the where do CTOs come from question,
Mm,
but maybe there's a like for you, like what like I mean given you've done development and product management, you kind of sit on both sides of that fence, right? Like,
yeah.
you could like what you know. Tell us a little bit about your journey to that kind of point.
Sure. Yeah. I'll tell you about my journey. And, I mean, maybe you're alluding to this broader question of where do CTOs come from? And I
Yep.
think the answer is lots of places. For me specifically, I got a CS degree, I got a master's degree, and um, I decided to try out product management right after college. And I went straight to Google. They have this early career product manager um, kind of rotational program that I joined, that is specifically made for engineers who want to try out product management, or who want to become product managers. So I did this for 3 years. I worked on Google Maps, I worked on Google Photos, and Chrome OS for a bit. And I really enjoyed being a product manager. But the I think at the end of the day, what I like is solving problems. And you solve lots of problems as a product manager. The types of problems that you're solving tend to be more organizational problems with these really long runways. And I enjoyed that a lot. But I really missed coding. I really missed coding, and I really missed thinking about how things are going to work. As a product manager, you think a lot about like what you're going to build and like what it's going to be for users. And as an engineer, I'm thinking what we're going to build as a founder, but most of the time I get to think about how we're going to build it, and that's the thing that really like gets me up in the morning. So for me personally, I think the transition back to a more engineering style role I think was really natural for me, and I'm really grateful that I spent the time as a product manager. I think it taught me a lot of skills around like we've been talking about communication a lot, communication and ownership and accountability, and all the things that I think are gonna hopefully are gonna make me a good CTO. But at the end of the day, I think I I'm a coder at heart, and I'm excited that I get to do that more. So that's where I come from, and I think that CTOs come from all sorts of places.
I do think that the answers do sort of have a pattern of doing many things like this because it is a varied job, and I think it comes from people coming from wanting varied experiences and wanting to sort of see the different sides of the problem. So I think your path is an example of you know, many patterns that sort of get
Yeah.
CTOs to evolve to. Um, do you ever look at like other CTOs and sort of like trying to understand maybe your future path in terms of what they might be doing or what they might be what you might be observing? I'm just
Is your question like, what do I observe from other CTOs or?
Yeah, I'm just, well, I mean, it's yeah, I guess like you're being earlier in the journey, right?
Mhm.
It's what do you see out there, or maybe it's confusing, or I don't know, or maybe there's like so many different ones, or maybe it's like I'm just gonna make my own path. I don't know. What do you sort of see in terms of
Yeah.
of that CTO space?
Yeah. I will say, I mean, I definitely look at other CTOs. I think uh, it would be reinventing the wheel is always a way to wind up in a ditch. And I think that I don't want to recreate what the CTO role is. So I definitely do look at other CTOs and try to learn from uh, the diversity of approaches to the role. Uh, I do think that, like I said a few times, I think generally when you like the average person who is a CTO is doing a very different job than what I'm doing, right? And I think it's actually really useful for me to be observing those CTOs who are doing a different job because it allows me to incorporate the elements that I wouldn't ordinarily think of as things that I need to be doing right now, and to kind of be thoughtful about those things as I'm making day to day decisions. Um, with all that said, I think there's definitely a little bit of my hubris that makes me want to kind of blaze my own trail a little bit with technical leadership, I'll say. And I do think that I have a pretty unique style of technical leadership. And um, my hope is that as this unfolds, I get to learn from really experienced CTOs like yourself, and uh, while simultaneously also kind of finding the ways that I'm best suited for, like finding the strategies that are going to work best with my unique set of skills and my unique approach to leadership in general.
I will say, I'll give you some advice about how to not take advice for a second. I found that when you have people who are further in the journey for you, they forget the time. So they forget there's the right advice for the right time. Okay, and like time either gets
Mm,
compressed or it gets confused, right? And
yeah.
you look back and you say, oh, well, this thing worked. And I found, at least in some advice that I've gotten, it was like they are right, but they're absolutely right, but it was the wrong time for that thing to
Mm.
occur, and it took me a little while to, because I didn't want to tell them they were wrong, and then I tried some stuff and it didn't work, and then I realized, oh no, the problem is not the advice, it's the timing of the advice, right? So it's a right,
Mm.
like, so you don't want to look so far down the road, right? Because that person like has to really go back in their brain and remember
Yeah.
what that was. It's almost like you got to find people who are a number of years ahead in terms of their journey, but not too far ahead. Because
Right.
hopefully they'll be able to sort of go back in time a little bit more accurately, or at least
Yeah.
know that's advice. Like there's right advice and wrong advice, but there's right advice and then it's right advice, wrong time advice,
Mm. Yeah.
which is a problem I struggled with personally when I was
Yeah.
as I was doing this. So
Yeah, that's a really really important point, and you know, there's no like one way to solve that problem, right? I think uh, my approach, I think, has been to try to have a lot of different advisors with all sorts of different backgrounds, and maybe you'll be my next
yeah,
advisor.
triangulate the all the answers to sort
Exactly.
of what
Yeah,
works.
the
And
answer is something in the middle. Yeah.
oh, and happy to continue to talk about this. This is my like my passion about understanding what this thing is they call the CTO.
Mm.
So can we? Let me ask you, and maybe so if we talk about tech for we have throughout this, but if we talk about tech for a second, and again, maybe like what do you think is really undergoing a significant change right now in terms of the technology
Mm.
space, and maybe what's driving that change, and then what I always find whenever there's a change and something driving it, there are fun challenges that come out from that change, and you either might be having to deal with those challenges or something. But what do you sort of think
Yeah.
about that now? And probably just for the record, your startup is probably addressing one of those things. So maybe beyond, so it's beyond that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. Like, there's lots of new things happening in technology today, and we are definitely capitalizing on a few trends, which I'd be happy to talk about if you want to talk about those specifically. But
no,
there's the
whatever you're willing to share. That's what I.
yeah, I definitely. I mean, I want to talk about the elephant in the room in technology right now, which is AI. I mean, AI is. I I haven't been through like I haven't been working in tech as we've undergone one of these paradigm shifts that have happened in the past 30 years, and so this is the first time that I'm experiencing something that people credibly seem to be calling a paradigm shift, and perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's all you know. Um, I think I will say, I think, in April of 2023, it is undeniable that AI is going to have a large impact on um, every industry. I think it's going to have a large impact on the tech industry. And I think, we don't work in AI. Our product, we're not building an AI product, but we've been leveraging AIs like ChatGPT, like Stable Diffusion, transformers in general. We've been trying to incorporate this into our product. I think whenever there's like a big technology shift, I think it's critical that you learn how to use it, or you don't, right? And if you don't, we're gonna fall behind. Um, I think for most people, I think the impact of AI is going to be less like it's changing the fundamental nature of our jobs, and more it's changing the tools and the mechanisms that we have to do our jobs. And one thing I wrote was I wrote recently there's a scripting language in Google Sheets, and I wrote a script that adds a function to call out to ChatGPT, and just like knowing, like understanding the potential power of this tool, and like actually integrating it into our day-to-day workflows, even in places that it seems like it might not be useful, has had an incredibly powerful impact. Like, we have a lot of copy we have to write, and we consulted with a UX writer, but at the end of the day, like ChatGPT is helping us. It's helping us solve problems. ChatGPT is helping us data mine. Something that it was able to do for us is like find websites associated with brands. For example, there's lots of tasks that you wouldn't think that it would be successful at because it's just a language model. But when you actually try it's it does something that ordinarily would have cost like thousands of dollars to do for operators. And we're very careful about, uh, I have a background in machine learning, and I worked on ML fairness at Google for a bit, but it's we try really hard not to overestimate it and to be very careful with the results that it produces and to always have humans checking them. But the amount of time it takes for a human to check ChatGPT mined data compared to the amount of time it would take a human to mine that data, it's night and day. And it just changes everything for us. The way we do work has been fundamentally changed by this. So I'm really bullish on AI, not necessarily in like, taking our jobs or changing the world, but just like you and me as people working in tech, like this new tool that we have, that we can apply to our day-to-day jobs.
No, it's interesting. We talked about. I mean, one position is these transformers like rewrite things, right? They're rewriters. There is a certain amount of people of creation that okay things we call creation, which are really just rewriting, and it's a little bit humbling to sort of think about. Well, okay, maybe I overestimated what I was, actually doing there, and yes, a machine can do that faster. But then there are certain things that I think are true creation,
Yeah.
like true creation, that maybe these things can't do, and there is that balance between that, and I
Yeah.
agree with you 100% on the not overestimating. And I always I I've a blog that's coming out about like if you think about AI being 50% right, if you just assume that, right,
Yes.
and there's a set of problems that only need to be 50% right, and especially in
Yes,
generative
exactly.
art, right, and that's where that sweet spot is. It might not solve high precision, high accuracy problems, and maybe it could, but I'm not like. But if you think about it as things that don't need that, like what can
Yeah.
you do? And there's a lot of, as you said, copy that's sort of written. I even asked. I said, "Okay, I'm interviewing CTOs. What should I ask them?" And they came out with a set of questions, and I will be like, and there were like, I think there were 10 questions, and part of what I asked, I think like 9 of them I have good variations of already but one of them was like, oh well, yeah, that's an interesting one, and I'm going to add it to the list
Yeah.
for next time. So even that one, like, yeah, it made this job a little bit better. It
Yeah.
didn't solve it all, but and I still believe some of my questions are better and getting at the root of things, but it did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, I think having a very realistic expectation of ChatGPT or transformer models in general allows you to reason about them in a much better way. And when you recognize that, like, we'll be able to keep 50% of this, you can kind of like change the parameters of your problem to meet the solution that you have for it. So, like, for example, with UI copy, a function that I wrote that I use it so often is just uh, here's a string, give me 20 variations of this string in like all sorts of different voices, and then I just scan through that and I take the components that sound good and I build a final product myself. But just like, the raw creativity of the generation, um, it's like I'm a cyborg. Right, I'm
Yeah,
working with this machine to solve this problem.
fine variations. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts before we do our little lightning round at the end?
Yeah. I maybe just one thought on AI is huge and AI is changing everything, but it's not the only thing that's changing, obviously. And while I think a lot of people might be perhaps distracted by AI and might be missing some other technological revolutions that are happening in the background at the same time. I personally think that a lot is changing in fintech right now that's going to enable like a whole new way of interacting with our financial system. So I think that's super exciting. But AI is definitely, it's the elephant in the room for sure.
All right, thank you. So, okay, speed round. So what's one book that you recommend to people?
One book that I recommend. Okay. Um, I'm going to recommend a fiction book.
Great.
Um, Exhalation by Ted Chiang. It's a collection of short stories. Beautiful, beautiful science fiction. I love sci-fi. I think like sci-fi gives us a lens on the world that it helps us build empathy with different universes that exist. And it's a really beautiful collection of short stories.
I love short stories. That's so I will definitely look at that one. So,
Mm.
a movie, TV show that you.
Okay, movie or TV show. Um, TV show. I watched okay, movie, I'll say, this is an obvious one. It just swept at the Oscars, but Everything Ever All at Once. Incredible movie. If you haven't seen it yet, you got to go watch it. I cried so much in that movie. I'm not embarrassed to say that I cried in that movie. And it was beautifully made, and a low
Yeah.
budget as well, too, which
I
is cool.
I I took my son. We went to the movie theater to watch it because it felt like one of those movies you had to sort of be immersed in rather than like see at home. So
Yeah.
enjoyed it like that. And yeah,
Yeah.
there are some interesting things about the how they made it. I watched some
Yeah.
YouTubes on that. And
Yeah.
and then what about a tech that you love? And this is I think might be more one that just kind of we talked about the AI stuff, but just something that's kind of uh, maybe used in your
Uh-huh.
day to day life.
Okay, this is going to sound super nerdy, but I promise you, learning about the existence of this and mastering this has dramatically changed my life. So I worked at Google for 3 years. I actually learned about this before joining Google, though. And when I was in college and throughout high school, like I used the Google workspace, the Google suite of docs, sheets, etc. And I learned that there's a scripting tool for all of these that integrates a bunch of APIs and connects like scripts. Like it's JavaScript. It'll run in Google servers, and you can do all sorts of random things to docs and sheets and every Google product. It's called Google App Script, and I feel like a wizard a lot when I'm coding. Nothing quite makes me feel like a wizard like Google Apps Scripts. Like the things that you can do, the productivity improvements that you can have when you have total control over your suite of tools, it's mind blowing. Like I feel like the tools that we have to use. I was a product manager. Like I know when products are bad, and I know I know how to build the perfect product for myself. And Google Apps Scripts allows me to turn Google Docs and Google Sheets, which I use every day, all the time, into something that is streamlined and works perfectly for my use case. So I built so many things in Google Apps Scripts. Actually, I taught a class at Google on Google Apps Scripts. So it's if you don't know about it and you use Google Workspace, it will improve your life.
I'll be honest. I used, but I never heard about it before. So definitely.
Yeah, and they don't talk about it, and the documentation is great too. I could talk all day about Google Apps Scripts.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and I appreciate the time. It's been great having this conversation, and I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for giving me this opportunity. I really enjoyed it. I look forward to watching the rest of the episodes.
All right. Thanks.